Now, as the world commemorates the 80th anniversaries this week of when the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear disarmament advocates warn the threat posed by nuclear weapons is now greater than ever. Joining us now to discuss this is Gem Romuld, the Australian Director for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, who were the Nobel Peace Prize winners in 2017. Now, firstly, Gem, as we know, it is the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing. Do you think the world has forgotten the lessons from it, particularly when you see comments like those from Donald Trump comparing the attack on Iran to the bombing of Japan in World War II?
Yeah, we must not forget the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And 80 years after those bombings, nuclear weapons still threaten our survival. The Hibakusha, the survivors' message, has been clear for decades. These weapons must be eliminated. If we forget those lessons, then we do risk repeating that same horror, and this time with far deadlier arsenals. These weapons still persist in world-destroying numbers today. Over 12,000 of them are held by 9 countries, and the risks of their use are only growing.
Now, Gem, we've seen the amount of nuclear weapons in the world increase. What do you make of comments today by Japan's Prime Minister, who urged all countries to make efforts towards nuclear disarmament, but they're resistant to calls to sign the treaty?
Yeah, I can see that they are in a position where they are under a lot of pressure to take serious steps on this issue. And really, it is shocking and embarrassing for many Japanese people that Japan, the only country to have suffered the atomic bombings, has not yet joined the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And there is resistance from the government in Tokyo. That's largely to do with pressure from the United States, which has over 5,000 nuclear weapons and does not like this treaty at all. None of the nuclear armed states do. But really, Japan should be leading the calls for abolition and not delaying it. But despite what the government is doing, there is a really strong and very popular movement in Japan for nuclear disarmament and for Japan to sign on to this treaty. And the mayors of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been clear on that. And the Hibakusha as well. And, recently we saw Nihon Hidankyo were awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize, and they've been very vocal about their sincere wish for this to happen.
Now, we saw conflict between India and Pakistan recently in which both sides threatened to use nuclear weapons, as well as the wars in Gaza and Ukraine in which it's been raised. How close are we to the brink of another nuclear war breaking out somewhere in the world?
Yeah, we are, unfortunately and scarily, we're closer to a nuclear war or nuclear exchange taking place than most people realise or want to think about. Russia's war on Ukraine, Israel's genocide on Gaza, and the regular conflict taking place between India and Pakistan, these all involve nuclear armed states. And whenever they're involved, there is the risk of escalation to the use of nuclear weapons. We know that a single miscalculation or misunderstanding could trigger catastrophe. That's why the only secure footing that we can be on is abolition of these weapons, not a gamble that deterrence, this idea, will always hold. And we've seen authoritative assessments from groups like the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists saying that this is the most dangerous time that we've ever lived in and that the risks are growing. And those risks are compounded by new factors today that weren't present at the dawn of the nuclear age 80 years ago. We're in a climate-stressed world that's seeing more conflict, and it will see more conflict. Cyber warfare capabilities are growing among state and non-state actors, and nuclear systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks and the potential involvement of artificial intelligence in nuclear decision-making.
Now, what parts of the world are you most worried about when it comes to nuclear weapons, and what do you think is most responsible for shifting the rhetoric away from never again to limited use? Is there such a thing as safe use of nuclear weapons, even if it's used as just a deterrence?
There's nothing safe about threatening or using nuclear weapons. Even the so-called low-yield tactical nuclear weapons, they're still nuclear weapons, and they're about the size of the weapons that destroyed the entire cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We maintain that every single nuclear armed state is doing the wrong thing. The vast majority of arsenals are held between the US and Russia, about 92%, but every single one of them need to take steps to deprioritize these weapons and to move towards disarmament. Most of them have committed under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the 50-year-old treaty, to do so, but they're not following through, and that's why we have seen this movement to ban nuclear weapons outright, to really try and kickstart disarmament, because we know that this idea of deterrence is a really dangerous myth. It's based on threats, luck, and the false promise that leaders will always make rational choices, which we certainly can't rely on. It's an idea that's been promoted really successfully by the nuclear armed states to justify the ongoing possession of nuclear weapons. But it can't be proven with certainty, and if it's so risky, and if and when it does fail, the consequences are catastrophic. So we really feel that it's time for the world to move on, because nuclear weapons are never a legitimate or secure means of defence.
Well, speaking of security, though, do you think that that changing global and political landscape has contributed to nations feeling like they need these weapons for security?
Yeah, we are concerned at the moment, especially in the wake of President Trump's election, that more nations, particularly in Europe, are discussing the potential acquisition of nuclear weapons. But at the same time as that, there is a large movement with over half the world on board, and they're in the limelight a lot less on this. But they are working to outlaw and eliminate these weapons, and most of the world has signed on to the ban treaty. In our region, almost all of the ASEAN and Pacific states have signed on. Indonesia is the most recent nation to come on board and ratify. So we really see two paths ahead. We deepen our involvement with the nuclear weapons states and accept the horrific consequences, or choose the path of stigmatization, prohibition, and do the hard but ultimately the planet-saving work of getting rid of nuclear weapons.
And lastly, Gem, do you think Australia can set an example for the Asia-Pacific region by signing up to the ban treaty?
Definitely. We wouldn't be leading because our region is mostly already on board, but we know that many of our neighbours are actively urging our government to sign on. And Australia wants to look like a good guy on this, especially this government wants to have a good reputation, and they have been engaging with this treaty and taking steps, but they haven't yet signed on. The governing Labor Party has a platform policy to do so, and that was introduced to the party in 2018 by Anthony Albanese himself. And Australia's signature would be really profound. It would get us on the right side of history, and it would pave a path for other nuclear endorsing states to join onto this treaty. We can do this and still have even an alliance with the United States, a military alliance. We've joined other treaties when the US hasn't, and the sky did not fall in. So, in our region, we have the scars of nuclear testing across the Pacific and the intergenerational legacy of these weapons. So we really feel that we can't sit on the fence. We've had polling released today that shows 68% of the Australian public really wants our government to sign and ratify this treaty. So we think it's time for them to follow through on that promise and to do that in this term of government.
Gem Romuld from ICAN, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.